Okay, now I'm happy to introduce you Juan Pere Etegoyen, and he is talking about SAP attacks.
Thank you. Is it good there? Okay. Thanks everyone for joining this talk. Thanks for the introduction. That was very similar, almost. So yes, we're going to be talking about SAP Business Objects, attacks to SAP Business Objects, and we're going to be discussing its internals and also how an attacker would be able to take over the information that is stored there and how this information is critical and what's different from this information other than the rest of the SAP systems. So the disclaimer, usual disclaimer that we include in the presentations. As of the company, I'm including this just to let you know what we do and why we are presenting all this information in security conferences. We are on APSIS, a company focused on business critical application security. So we started doing SAP and Oracle, also researching about SAP HANA, business objects, mobile, NetWeaver, Java, ABAP. So we develop software, we do research, report advisories of vulnerabilities to SAP, work closely with SAP in order to fix the vulnerabilities, present in security conferences such as this one. For example, this year we have been presenting about business objects, SAP HANA, SAP Forensics and Anti-Forensics, SAP Cybersecurity. So we are continuously speaking on security conferences because we believe there is a gap in the security of SAP systems, and we want to communicate this, and we want to let you know how you can secure your SAP systems. So you have the numbers there. As for myself, well, my name is kind of long. It's Juan Pablo Pérez Echegoyen, but you can call me JP. That's much easier. If you notice my strange accent, that's because I'm from Argentina. So for those of you who are from Germany, please avoid any joke about the World Cup. We're going to be fine that way. My background is technical. I'm coming from the world of pen testing and vulnerabilities research, and then moving into the SAP world, right? So I met Mariano in my previous work. Mariano is a founder of ONAPSIS, and we started doing research on SAP systems, and then ONAPSIS was founded, and then we started working more specifically on this. So you have there the information for myself as well. But why did we start on this, right? And this is a quote from Mariano from ONAPSIS. And basically, while doing traditional penetration testing and traditional vulnerability assessments, Mariano found out that doing assessments that included SAP systems, we said that it's 95% of the time because no one would believe us that it's 100%, but pretty much every time that there was an SAP system, there was a vulnerability that could be abused in order to access the system or compromise the system, right? And that's why we identified this kind of gap, because whenever you ask the SAP security administrator, the IT security guys, or the responsible for the security of the SAP systems, that one will tell you, yes, we are definitely doing SAP security. We have segregation of duties, we have audits, we have policies and compliance. There's a lot around SAP security. But the problem is that there is a gap in the technical layer. There's a lot of services and processes and technical components supporting these systems that need to be addressed in a specific way, like with the proper knowledge, with the proper tools, with the proper assessments. So that's a gap that we have identified. And it's not us saying that. You will see in the headlines news about SAP vulnerabilities on SAP systems taken offline because of SAP issues that were not addressed by the customers. So if you take a look at the news, you will see a lot of this. And we believe it's going to be increasing. So as for this talk, this is the agenda. We are going to be talking about SAP Business Objects landscape, about the processes, the protocols, the configurations. Then about the attacker lifecycle. How would an attacker be able to actually discover SAP business object systems, interact with these systems? And finally, once a system was compromised by an attacker by any means, I will show you how an attacker will be able to potentially access the information and do something with it, right? Because it's different than SAP systems, traditional SAP systems that are holding the real business information, and we will identify and understand that. And then finally, some conclusions. So what is SAP? Any of you running SAP systems or pen testing SAP systems, auditing SAP systems? Myself? Okay. For those of you who are not so familiar with SAP systems, I'm not going to be, I'm going to be brief here. These are systems or applications that are being running pretty much since 1970s, something like that, and not running specific things, but the most critical business processes within the company. Okay, so we have purchase orders, HR information, bank account numbers, credit cards information. We have payroll, material management, warehouse. All the information that flows through the company is flowing through processes that are running within the SAP systems. So these are some examples, as you can see there. But if we go to Business Objects, this is a company that was purchased in 2007 by SAP. It was purchased because of its product that's called also Business Objects. And this product is its main functionality is to provide business intelligence and business analysis. So this is a product that connects to different sources of information, for example, Business Warehouse, the SAP Business Suite, databases, external systems. It's pulling information in order to process it and generate reports. That those reports are not typically being consumed by typical end users, SAP end users, but by managers or by upper management. And this information is being used to support the decision-making process, right? So the upper management is going to be basing its decisions on the information generated by these systems. Therefore, these systems are also critical. The information is being pulled from systems which are definitely critical, such as ERP, CRM, SCM, SLM, all the business suite, business warehouse, and other services as well. So this is a slide that you will see in most of our presentations. We like to translate vulnerabilities, exploitation of vulnerabilities, attacks to SAP systems into a more business word, right? Business-oriented wording, which is espionage, sabotage, and fraud attacks. That's possible because of the processes and information that is being stored on the SAP systems. However, when we talk about, this is easy to understand, right? And you will see in every presentation. However, if we talk about the business object system, the impact is kind of more difficult to identify. Like, it's a system to generate reports. It's a system that supports, is not supporting any critical business process, right? But the thing is, it's generating information that is very, very important. For example, companies that are running in the stocks market, right? So companies that their stocks are depending on the value of their stocks is depending on how the company is doing financially and by other aspects, right? So if an attacker is able to break into a system and get in advance the financial results or the financial plannings for that company, he would have a good information in order to go to the stocks market and do whatever with that information, right? He could sell, buy, do anything. And these also are some examples. For example, the forecast, sales forecast, liquidity planning, budgeting, all those processes are based upon the reports that are generated on business objects. So it's not only about the information that the attacker could get, but also if the attacker is able to break into that system, he could change it and modify the decision-making process within the company. So that's also another attack vector. But it's all about business intelligence, right? So it's a product that is used to support the business intelligence process. And we will see many acronyms in SAP products. We will see BO, BI, BW, and you will learn a lot of different product names. And once you learn them, you will have to learn new ones because SAP is also changing them. But these ones are specific for this presentation. BO as for business objects, BI as for business intelligence, and BW as for business warehouse, which is an important component in the business object landscape, because even though business object can be connected to SAP systems directly and other sources, many other sources, the most common use case is to have business objects connected to business warehouse application. And how does it work? It's the business warehouse system is pulling information from the different business suite systems, and through RFC calls in the network level, it's going to be receiving information through RFC calls. Even though there are some layers in between, it's called ETL, and you will have different abstraction layers. In the background, it's all RFC. So this is an architectural diagram of business objects. We could be speaking hours about this. I would like to stress some important parts. For example, the middle section that you see a gray area interconnecting several of these boxes. Each one of these boxes are processes that we will talk about later. But this is called Business Object Service Bus. This is implemented on top of Corba, which is a protocol that we will discuss in the following slides. But that's the intercommunication bus of all the different components within SAP Business Objects. Then another important component is the web application server and web application container and the web server. I would say those three boxes are implemented on top of Apache Tomcat. So whenever you install a business object, you will have also a Tomcat application server installed as well. Each one of those processes, each one of those boxes is a specific process, at least the blue ones in the lower section, and you will see the information, how the information is flowing from the sources all the way to the client through a web client, and then other integration paths as well. But I don't want to get more into details about this. I think it's better to see it this way, this simplified version. We have the client here. The client, it could be an HTTP, the browser, the web browser, going through HTTP protocol. You have applications such as the central management console and other applications that are shipped by default, but then customers can develop their own applications on top of the Apache Tomcat, which would be Java, right? But then you have other applications that you can download and install, and these applications will be connecting either to the Corba system or through the HTTP interface that we will describe later. But you have the SDKs as well, which could be Java or .NET, so you can develop your own applications to connect to business objects. Each one of these little boxes, as I said before, is a process. So SAP Business Objects is shipped with over 15 processes. Each one of these is not only a process, but also a TCP port. So by default, you will have many different TCP services exposed to the network. And we will see how to communicate with it. In the data tier, well, it could be a database, it could be a SAP ERP, CRM, a business suite, any system. Basically, it's shipped with connectors to many different sources. You could even connect to a system other than SAP also. So there are many ways to pull data from the external sources to the SAP Business Object system. So as for the services, there are some services which are quite important. For example, the central management server, that's one of these over 15 services that is kind of the brain of all the SAP Business Objects infrastructure, because it knows how to communicate with the rest of the services. So if you need to interact with some of these services, you need to connect first to the central management server, right? So that's kind of the most important one. Then you have the file repository server. As I said before, it's about business BI, right? Business intelligence. It's about generating reports. It's about the information. So these reports are stored in the database, the metadata, and also in the file system, the report itself. So the file repository server is kind of holding all the information for the two parts, right? Then the server intelligence agent, that's the one that is allowed to start and stop services. So it's kind of a high privileged server that's, from an attacker standpoint, that's a sensitive process that an attacker could target. And as for endpoints, we have web applications. We have the CMC, for example, that is shipped by default. We have other applications as well, but we also have web services. You will probably see some previous talks about SAP business objects. There is one specific talking about web services attacks. So that's targeting this specific part. However, we are going to focus on more the internals, right? How the SAP business object is communicating between the processes and how to interact with it. So as from a protocol or communication standpoint, there are basically two main protocols. We could also add the database connection, right? But that's, as for the protocols to connect to the SAP business objects, you have two ways. One is HTTP. So there are web applications available in the Tomcat web application server. There's also SOAP and REST APIs, so you can develop applications and connect this application through the SOAP API and the REST API. Then there is this other protocol that is called Corba, which is kind of interconnecting all the different processes. So what is this Corba protocol? Anyone familiar with Corba protocol? Okay, I see some faces sort of. Well, it was not defined by SAP. It's a very old protocol, actually. It's even before web services, right? It's a way to remotely call a function in an external server, right? So if you want to develop an application that executes something in a remote server, you can use Corba, for example, to do this. You develop the client and the server, and you communicate using Corba. And there are some advantages of using this protocol. It can be used, it's similar to RMI, the concept. SAP has its own RMI implementation that is called P4 RMI, SAP P4. And it can be used through the network. The protocol that is used, it's called IIOP. So that's more in the network layer. And you need IDLs. The IDLs are kind of definitions of the interface, right? So you need the IDL in the server and in the client in order to communicate, right? So if you want to develop something, you need to have that information. But the cool thing is that it's defined to be running on different platforms and on different also programming languages. So you may have a server running on Linux and the server coded in C++, for example, and a client running on Windows with a client that was developed on Java, for example. That's very important because it allows interoperability of the different clients and servers, right? So how do you communicate with Corba or with the Corba server? Well, you need a specific piece of information that is called IOR, the interoperable object reference. It's basically a reference to a remote object in somewhere, right, accessible through the network. So once you have the IOR, there's different pieces of information within the IOR, but the most important ones are the host, the host or IP address, that's the location, the port, and the IDL. So which is the interface that you will use in order to communicate with it. So for example, if I want to develop a Hello World application, I can create the hello world process, right, or function, and then remotely call this hello world function from anywhere. So when we install a BO by default, I said before that we have Tomcat installed. We also have over 15 services, and each one of these services, I also said that there is a TCP port listening for it. And the way they communicate is through Corba. So the way they communicate in between is using the CMS, which is this server, this brain of the BO implementation. And one way into how we can connect to these services is we need to know either the IOR, which is kind of difficult to know if we don't know anything, but we also need to know the IDL itself, right? How to actually, which are the processes exposed within this service, and which is the function name, for example, the parameters, the type of the parameters. So there is a lot of information that we need to know in order to communicate. But there are ways to get that information. For example, the CMS, the brain of these business objects, is something that is listening in two ports. One is fixed and is 6400, and the other one is dynamic, the same as all the rest of the services, right? Over 15 services. So as a client, we can do a single telnet, for example, connect to this port, send the string APS, and that will give the IOR of the CMS, right? So that's the starting point to connect to the first service. We can connect to the CMS using this approach. So the IOR then can be parsed. There are parsers online that you can download, and you don't need to code your own parser, right? So let's talk a little bit about the attacker lifecycle, right? So we talked a little bit about the processes, ports, protocols, how to communicate with BO. But then from an attacker standpoint, we want to understand which is the criticality, or which are the steps that an attacker would try to leverage in order to access this information. So yeah, we have the typical segregation of the attackers, right? But I would say the most important thing to understand is who is the potential attacker for a business object implementation, right? It's not like there is profit out of the information per se that is stored in the business object implementation. What we need to identify is who is finding this information valuable, right? Well, definitely a competitor. A competitor would be a potential attacker for this. The internal attacker is also a potential attacker for this information. And then those are kind of the most important attackers that would need to identify, because other than that, it's going to be more difficult to say that, okay, script kiddies, just for fun, criminal organizations. Those two groups, I would say, those are the kind of the most important ones. And then in order to keep a close look at the SAP Business Object implementation, we need to identify these attackers, and we need to define the right processes to monitor the activity within the business object implementation, and then configure, define standards, security configuration standards, and policies to secure this. But we need to be aware of the attackers even before we do all this. So as for the reconnaissance, we have some ports here for you to be aware of the default ports. CMS, 2 ports. Remember, one is static and the other is dynamic. This is the most important component. Server intelligence agent, that's the one that can be used to start and stop the SAP business object processes. CMS database, it really depends on which database you use. It really depends also on the version. It could be Sybase, it could be SQL, it could be any database. Version management, there is a specific service that can be used to do some sort of versioning of the applications. That's 3690. And then you have the web application frontend, 8080, default Tomcat port, and then 6405, that's a web application container server. also HTTP. Other than these around 7 ports, you have all the rest of the dynamic ports, right? So how would an attacker try to connect to a Corba system? Well, you have the web port, right? The 8080. That's the trivial connection. But then, in terms of Corba, there is a unique point that the attacker needs. That's the CMS IP, the CMS port, the CMS IOR, and the server IORs. Because if he wants to connect to the rest of the services, he needs to have the IOR, not only the IP and the port. So entry point would be the CMS fixed port, and then all the dynamic ports can be identified by connecting to the CMS. So this is how it works. The example use case, I just included a screenshot of Wireshark. Wireshark has a quite nice dissector of Corba, so you can search through Corba as well, do different kind of queries. Yeah, we will use it. So I'm going to start with the first demo. Okay. So this is basically someone who has the IP address and the fixed port 6400 send the IPF string, right? That's all he needs. And he gets the IOR of the CMS. So that's the first IOR. Once well, this was very fast, but having the IOR, of the CMS, what we can do is we can list the rest of the IORs, because the CMS is a service that knows how to connect to the rest of the services. And then querying directly to a dynamic port of the CMS, we can retrieve all the different IORs for the rest of the services, and that will give us an entry point to the rest of the services as well. Then we need to know the IDLs, and we need to know which are the interfaces exposed. That's more information, but at least we have the entry point to how to connect to all the different services. So wrapping up, it was CMS fixed port, IOR, use the IOR to connect to the dynamic port, and then list all the rest of the services. The most important part of this is to know that we need to restrict at the network level the connectivity to this kind of ports or this kind of services, because it makes no sense to have all these services exposed to anyone if no one is actually consuming them, right? From a client standpoint, you might have some applications consuming this interface, but for all the rest of the applications or the rest of the IP addresses, it should be restricted. It's equivalent to any other SAP system that you have a lot of different services, but only a few of them needs to be really exposed to the end user's network. So as for account types, we have different type of accounts. Some points here. Enterprise is the standard account type, like the default when you install BusinessObjects systems, it's going to be shipped with several enterprise type accounts. It's kind of a local authentication, right? But then you can integrate it with SAP systems, with LDAP. Through LDAP, you can authenticate externally through Active Directory. So if you have, this goes through aliases. So if you have aliases to the default account, then you have to be aware of that too. So just to keep as a reference, enterprise is local authentication. All the rest is external authentication. So we have some default users in the local authentication. We need to be aware of the external default users as well. So these are the default accounts. You will have this as a reference in the presentation. Administrator is the most powerful account. Can be changed, so you can rename it. That's nice. Then you have some other disabled accounts. The most important, I would say, is the guest account. even though it's disabled by default, if you enable it, it allows to get a lot of information. So even though it's a guest, it has some privileges. So it's something that we definitely need to make sure that it's disabled. Then you have the database users, BOI user. That's authentication with the database, using the local database. It could be, it really depends on the database. And then you have the other users as well. It's important, this is the result of a research project that was conducted last year. As an outcome of this project, ONAPSIS reported over 30 some vulnerabilities to SAP. Some of these are fixed, some others are not. So we encourage you to basically keep up with the vulnerabilities, with the advisories and the sub-security notes. Second Tuesday of every month, SAP releases the new patches. So if you're running SAP Business Objects, keep up with the patches, because there are critical vulnerabilities that will be fixed in the upcoming months. So as for reconnaissance, we have some ways into identifying the version. For example, we can connect through a web interface. We will see something like that, which is different from previous versions. So we can do some sort of identification of the major version. But then in the web services interface, we have also the ability to ask for the version itself. It's not the patch level, but the major version is also available. So it's very useful in order to identify which version we are communicating with. Man in the middle, communication is encrypted by default. We all know that we should use, well, not SSL, right? TLS for HTTP. Corba can be also encrypted as well. So if we are securing our BO implementation, we should also use SSL or TLS protocols to secure this communication. So let's see how this business information can be leveraged from an attacker standpoint. So there are two different attack vectors that can be triggered when we talk about BO implementations. One is intercepting information, is basically getting the information that is stored in the system, and the other is poisoning the information. It's modifying the information in order to modify the decisions or the behavior of someone who's acting upon that information. So I'm going to get into details of each one. For example, there is information that should be available for the BO system, because the BO system is connecting to source systems, right? Such as Business Warehouse, Business Suite, databases. So all that information, at least read-only, is available. So that information, if an attacker breaks into a BO system, that's available, all that business information. But the attacker cannot modify it, right? So it's kind of difficult for an attacker to modify this information, because if it's properly configured, it's only read-only. But then that information is available, and also the business reports, financial statement, all the reports that are there are available. So he could access it and do anything with that information. But also, there's a more complicated or more complex attack vector, which is the modification of the reports or the information within BO. So, well, it really depends. Each one of the attacks has its own complexity, but if the BO system is breached, then it's possible. For example, it could point to a completely different SAP system or BW system, right? We could switch the source system to make it generate reports based on completely different information. Changing info providers, where the RFC functions or the functions that are being used to extract the information can also be modified as well. And then, of course, we can change the reports. The attacker could try to modify dashboards or KPIs. Any information that is being generated could be modified because of the privileges. So let's see another video. This is a little bit longer. Okay. Yes, basically this video is about an attacker who had previously compromised a BO system, and then based on that, he would try to connect to the source system, right? Because the information of the connections, such as username, passwords, IP address, that's all there in the business object system. So let's say the attacker exploited a vulnerability, something in the system, like one of these vulnerabilities reported and fixed. When it's fixed, the information will be available. So any vulnerability, a default user, anything on the system, he got administrator access. He's validating that. Okay, he's administrator, but he knows that there is information there, business information, right? So this is the CMC. This is the web application. As you can see, the port is 8080. That's a Tomcat application. Then he goes to the reports, and he sees, well, these are standard reports that are shipped by default. So you will see these are nice reports with some nice styles. Well, this is something that he could get, but this is something shipped by default. This could be a standard report generated. This could be a custom report generated by real business information, right? But, sorry. But he knows this is connected to other systems, for example, an ERP. So he goes to the report, and he sees that there is real business information there. And you will be able to tell the difference, because this report is really not as nice as the other one. This is one that we developed. And this is based on information coming from the ERP system. So he found that out, and he wants to connect to the source system. He knows it's possible because all the information is there. The system is pulling information from the ERP. So the information as for the username, password, IP, instance number, that's all there. So he sees this connection, ERP, all BAPIs. That's a connection to a ERP, but he couldn't get any other information, right? Because it's not available through the central management console. But he heard somewhere that there is an application that's called a query builder. That's kind of an SQL equivalent in BusinessObjects that allows users to execute queries to access reports, technical information, any kind of information. We have here some of the queries. So he could query for info objects, that's reports. I'm going to move ahead because he's browsing different options. Okay. Yeah, so he's not only able to query reports, but also to query technical information, such as the connections to external systems. And this is a connection, for example, to the ERP. So all this information is available through the query builder. So some parts of this information are encrypted. So even through the query builder, it shouldn't be possible to get this information. Is something with the video? Okay, 5 more minutes, right? Okay, so basically, the outcome of this demo is that we are running out of time. Is that even the information is available to the user, he can actually decrypt the encrypted information, and he can connect to the source system. So once the system was compromised, not only the information stored in BO is available, but also he would be able to connect to the source systems, all the systems that are connected to this BO. So it's not only about the security of the information stored there, but also of the connections. So client-side attacks. Well, there are client-side attacks as well. Typical is If an attacker is trying to break into a BO system, he would try server-side, client-side. If he's trying client-side, check the file system, browser cookies. But through network sniffing, it's also possible. So as I said before, there is a nice dissector in Wireshark that you can basically browse all the information, query, and filter. So in this demo, what we are doing is we are basically using callback traffic, getting the session ID from the callback traffic. If there is an application communicating through callback, let's say the client left the application running, this session ID in the callback protocol, which is not encrypted by default, can be used to generate a web token. So once the callback traffic is gathered, then a web session can be obtained through this protocol, right? So now we have all this, the URLs here, but with the SI session ID, that is the callback session ID, a report through the web browser can be accessed. So as you can see, just having the callback session ID by network sniffing, the attacker was able to get a report through the web browser. So from a server-side standpoint, it's also possible if the server is compromised by a vulnerability by any means. Remember that reports are stored in the file system, so there are going to be entries on the database, but also on the file system where all the information, all the reports are there. And there is a last demo. It's very short, but I think it's very visual as well. So this is a system that was compromised by an attacker. This is a report that was generated by the system. This is the ID of the report. Everything's fine from a sales standpoint, but then the attacker can go to the file system, find the specific path to the report, modify the report within the file system, and without anything, the system will never notice this change, right? And now, if the attacker sees, a valid user accessing that report will see a completely different result, right? So that report can be completely modified, and the user will never notice the difference because there is no kind of integrity check on the reports. So some conclusions. Admin guide is very complete and very comprehensive, so I really encourage you to take a look at that. Keep the systems updated. There are vulnerabilities that are being patched by SAP. SAP is continuously fixing the vulnerabilities and working on it. Enable auditing. There are auditing capabilities within BO. Make use of it, leverage it. Scan and monitor the systems. Analyze the vulnerabilities, analyze the configurations, make sure that there are no risks affecting the BO system, because otherwise this could be affecting the source systems as well, and there are many attacks that are possible because of the criticality of the information. Secure the systems and the critical data. Apologize for taking, maybe I took some, I think we have no more time for questions, but I can take the questions out of the room if you want to. Thank you.
I mean, if there would be one quick question. Anyone? Okay.
With the change to the HANA architecture, the database architecture, I think that represents a fairly significant change, if nothing, in their business model. But do you know, in your experience, of any other development that's going on with that? Because I guess that's quite a widespread change over the past recent time for them. Is there any further development which would include any hardening within SAP itself?
I'm not sure if I got it right.
I understood that the HANA, H-A-N-A architecture is a fairly significant change, if nothing else for the business model, a fairly significant change for SAP.
Definitely.
Has that caused any other development changes which would include hardening? Because I assume it needed a significant rewrite of a lot of the database layers. So do you know if they've addressed any other problems there or doing any other hardening in your experience?
Well, what I can tell you is that SAP is pushing a lot towards HANA and towards securing SAP HANA. For example, we have reported vulnerabilities in HANA that were fixed within a month, and we have reported vulnerabilities in BusinessObjects that are not yet fixed. So SAP is pushing a lot towards HANA. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of improvements within HANA, and I don't know how far they're going within improving SAP BusinessObjects. So if you, I don't know if that was the question.
Yes, I guess part of the relationship between the two.
Yeah, well, there's going to be a lot of more work within SAP HANA than BusinessObjects.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.